The German defenders at the drop zone near St. Miraglise hear it first at 0148 hours on June 6, 1944, a sound that makes no tactical sense. American paratroopers are landing in the darkness, scattered across the Norman hedgerows, and from one position in particular comes a stream of rifle fire that does not pause, does not hesitate, does not stop for the reload cycle that every soldier knows must come after 15 rounds. The M1 Carbine has a 15-round magazine, and doctrine dictates a 3 to 5 second pause to eject the empty, retrieve a fresh magazine from a pouch, insert it, and chamber the first round. But this rifle is not pausing. It fires 15 rounds. There's a barely perceptible click, and then it fires 15 more, continuous and unrelenting, like a string of firecrackers that refuses to end. The German machine gunners trying to suppress the position cannot understand it. They start calling it das endlose Gewehr, the endless rifle, because it defies everything they know about American infantry weapons and the rhythm of small arms combat. If you believe stories like this shouldn't vanish with time, subscribe. Let's keep their memory alive together. The man firing that rifle is Corporal Thomas "Tommy" Brennan, a 22-year-old paratrooper from the 82nd Airborne Division and a former auto mechanic from Detroit who spent his teenage years taking apart engines, modifying carburetors, and figuring out ways to make things run faster, smoother, and more efficiently than the factory ever intended. He brought that same mindset into the Army when he enlisted in 1942, and it got him into trouble almost immediately. Brennan did not just maintain his equipment, he modified it, always looking for ways to shave seconds off reload times, reduce weight, or improve reliability. His squad leader told him to stop. His platoon sergeant threatened him with disciplinary action. His company commander put a formal reprimand in his file after Brennan was caught modifying the sling swivels on his M1 Carbine to allow faster transitions between carry positions. But Brennan could not stop tinkering. It was not about defiance or ego. It was about survival. He understood, in a way that many officers did not, that combat is a game of seconds, and the soldier who can shoot, reload, and shoot again faster than his opponent is the soldier who goes home alive. Brennan grew up in Detroit during the Great Depression, watching his father work double shifts at the Ford plant, building machines with precision and care, understanding that every component had a purpose, and that failure was not an abstract concept, but a tangible event that happened when tolerances were not met or when shortcuts were taken. Brennan absorbed those lessons, and by the time he was 14, he was rebuilding motorcycle engines in the garage and selling them to neighbors who could not afford new ones. He learned that the difference between a machine that worked and a machine that failed was often a matter of millimeters, that small modifications could have large effects, and that the people who designed equipment in factories rarely understood how that equipment would be used in the real world. When he joined the Army and was issued an M1 Carbine, he saw a weapon that was light, reliable, and effective at close range, but also a weapon with one critical flaw that drove him crazy every time he thought about it. The reload time was too slow. The M1 Carbine was adopted in 1941 as a lightweight alternative to the M1 Gewehr rifle, designed for support troops, vehicle crews, and paratroopers who needed firepower without the weight of a full-size battle rifle. It fired a .30 caliber cartridge from a 15-round detachable box magazine, and in most combat situations, it performed exactly as designed. But Brennan noticed something during training exercises that bothered him. In close-quarters engagements, especially the kind of chaotic, fast-moving firefights that paratroopers could expect after landing behind enemy lines, the reload cycle created a dangerous vulnerability. A paratrooper caught in the open with an empty magazine had to stop, find cover, retrieve a fresh magazine, insert and chamber a round, all while under fire. Those 5 seconds felt like an eternity, and Brennan watched soldiers get hit during reload cycles because they were distracted, fumbling with pouches, or rushing the process and causing malfunctions. Brennan believed there had to be a way to eliminate the reload pause, or at least reduce it to the point where it became tactically insignificant. He started experimenting in late 1943, during the division's training in England before the Normandy invasion. The idea came to him while watching a gunner reload a belt-fed machine gun. The gunner did not stop firing to reload. He simply fed a new belt into the weapon while the old one was still cycling through, creating continuous fire without pause. Brennan wondered if the same principle could be applied to a magazine-fed weapon. What if, Instead of carrying loose magazines in pouches, a soldier could attach two magazines together in a way that allowed an instant flip and reload. The empty magazine would be ejected, the rifle rotated, and the fresh magazine inserted in a single motion, cutting the reload time from 5 seconds to less than 1. He sketched the concept on a scrap of paper, a simple clamp or bracket that would hold two magazines back to back, offset so they would not interfere with the weapon's operation. When one magazine was empty, the soldier would eject it, flip the entire assembly, and insert the second magazine, which was already in his hand because it was attached to the first. Brennan showed the sketch to a few soldiers in his squad, and reactions were mixed. Some thought it was clever. Others thought it was unnecessary, pointing out that trained soldiers could reload quickly enough with standard pouches. A few thought it would add weight and bulk to the rifle, making it harder to carry and maneuver. Brennan disagreed. The dual magazine system would add maybe 6 ounces, but it would eliminate the need to reach into a pouch, fumble with magazine, and orient it correctly before insertion. In a firefight, when hands were shaking and visibility was poor, that simplification could mean the difference between life and death. Brennan did not ask for permission. He went to the motor pool, scrounged some sheet metal and rivets, and fabricated a prototype clamp in an afternoon. It was crude, just 2 pieces of steel bent into a U-shape and riveted together with spacers to hold the magazines back-to-back at the correct offset. He attached 2 loaded magazines, inserted one into his carbine, and tested the system on the range during off-duty hours. It worked. When the first magazine was empty, he hit the magazine release, pulled the empty magazine and clamp assembly out, rotated it 180 degrees, and slammed the fresh magazine into the receiver. The entire process took less than 2 seconds, faster than any reload he had ever performed with loose magazines. He practiced the motion until it became automatic, until he could do it without looking, until the flip and insertion were a single fluid movement that required no conscious thought. He showed the system to his assistant squad leader, Sergeant Mike O'Hara, a combat veteran of the North Africa campaign who had seen enough firefights to recognize a good idea when he saw one. O'Hara tested the dual magazine system himself, and after a few practice reloads, he looked at Brennan and said, "This is going to save lives, but if you show it the officers, they're going to confiscate it and tell you to follow regulations. So keep it quiet, make a few more, and distribute them to the squad. If it works in combat, word will spread on its own." Brennan followed that advice. He fabricated 8 more dual magazine clamps, handed them out to soldiers in his squad, and swore them to secrecy. They trained with the system, refined the reload technique, and by the time the 82nd Airborne boarded the C-47 transports from the Normandy jump, every man in Brennan's squad was carrying at least one dual magazine setup. The jump into Normandy was a disaster from the start. Heavy cloud cover, anti-aircraft fire, and pilot error scattered the 82nd Airborne across a 50-mile area, dropping paratroopers into flooded fields, hedgerows, and German-occupied villages miles from their intended drop zones. Brennan landed in a tree near St. Miraglise, cut himself free from his parachute harness, and dropped 15 feet to the ground, twisting his ankle on impact. He lay in the darkness, listening to gunfire, explosions, and the shouts of men trying to find their units. He had no idea where he was, no idea where his squad was, and no radio contact with anyone. He had his M1 carbine, 6 dual magazine clamps loaded with a total of 180 rounds, a few grenades, and a fighting knife. That was all. He started moving east, using the stars and the sound of gunfire to orient himself, trying to link up with other American forces. Within an hour, he encountered 3 other paratroopers from different units, all of them lost and disoriented. They formed an improvised fire team and continued moving, try to find a defensible position where they could wait for daylight and get their bearings. At 0145 hours, they stumbled into a German patrol for soldiers moving along a hedgerow road. The encounter was sudden and brutal. Brennan opened fire first, his carbine spitting flame in the darkness, and the Germans went down before they could raise their weapons. The sound of the firefight brought more German troops running, and suddenly the 4 Americans were pinned down in a shallow ditch, taking fire from multiple directions. Brennan positioned himself at the edge of the ditch, his carbine resting on the lip of the earth, and began returning fire. He could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, 20, maybe 30 yards away, and he aimed at the flashes, squeezing off controlled bursts. His first magazine emptied in less than 10 seconds. Without thinking, without hesitation, he hit the magazine release, pulled the empty magazine and clamp out, flipped it, and slammed the fresh magazine home. The reload took less than 2 seconds, and he was firing again before the Germans realized he had paused at all. He fired the second magazine, reloaded with another dual magazine clamp, and kept shooting. The Germans, expecting a pause in the American fire, began to advance during what they thought would be a reload cycle. Instead, they ran into continuous fire and were forced to retreat. The firefight lasted 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. Brennan went through 4 dual magazine clamps, firing 120 rounds, and the 3 other paratroopers contributed what they could with their own weapons. When the Germans finally pulled back, the Americans used a lull to reposition, moving along the hedgerow toward a farmhouse that offered better cover. They reached the farmhouse just before dawn, and Brennan took up a defensive position in a second-floor window overlooking the approach road. That was where the next engagement began, and that was where the dual magazine system proved its true value. At 0630 hours, a German infantry squad, reinforced with a machine gun team, moved toward the farmhouse. They had been tasked with clearing American paratroopers from the area, and they expected scattered, disorganized resistance. What they encountered was something different. Brennan opened fire from the window, and the lead German soldiers dropped. The rest dug for cover, tried to return fire, but Brennan did not give them time to organize. He fired 15 rounds, reloaded in under 2 seconds, and fired 15 more. The Germans, conditioned by experience to expect a pause after 15 rounds, began to move during what should have been a reload cycle. But there was no pause. Brennan kept firing, kept reloading, kept the pressure on, and the Germans could not advance. They started shouting to each other, confused and frustrated, unable to understand how an American carbine was maintaining such a high rate of fire without the expected pauses. The German squad leader ordered his machine gun team to suppress the window, and a burst of MG-42 fire tore through the farmhouse wall, showering Brennan with plaster and with splinters. He ducked below the windowsill, waited for the burst to end, then popped back up and fired at the machine gun position. He saw the gunner slump forward, hit in the shoulder or chest, and the machine gun went silent. The German squad pulled back, dragging their wounded, and Brennan reloaded again, his hands moving on autopilot, muscle memory taking over. He was breathing hard, his heart pounding, his ears ringing from the continuous gunfire. But he was alive, and the Germans were retreating. Over the next 6 hours, Brennan and the 3 other paratroopers held the farmhouse against multiple German probes and assaults. Each time, the dual magazine system gave Brennan a critical edge. He could maintain fire longer, reload faster, and keep the Germans off balance. The psychological impact was as important as the tactical advantage. The Germans, hearing continuous fire from a single weapon, began to overestimate the number of defenders in the farmhouse. They thought they were facing a reinforced squad or even a platoon, when in reality it was 4 men with limited ammunition and no support. The illusion of overwhelming firepower, created by nothing more than a simple clamp holding 2 magazines together, convinced the Germans that a direct assault would be too costly, and they shifted their focus to other targets. By mid-afternoon, American forces had consolidated enough to send a relief patrol to the farmhouse, and Brennan and his improvised fire team were able to withdraw to friendly lines. Brennan's carbine was filthy, covered in carbon residue and dust, but it was still functional. He had fired more than 300 rounds in less than 12 hours, gone through 20 dual magazine reloads, and his weapon had not malfunctioned once. The clamps were battered and scratched, but they had held together, and more importantly, they had worked exactly as designed. Word of Brennan's dual magazine system spread quickly through the 82nd Airborne. Soldiers who had seen him in action, or who had heard about the endless rifle that held off German attacks, started asking him to make clamps for their own carbines. Brennan obliged, fabricating more clamps using scrap metal rivets and tools scrounged from abandoned vehicles and buildings. Within a week, dozens of paratroopers in his battalion were using the system, and the impact on small unit engagements was noticeable. Paratroopers equipped with dual magazines could maintain suppressive fire longer, execute faster reloads during movement, and hold defensive positions with fewer personnel. The modification was simple, inexpensive, and required no changes to the carbine itself, which meant could be adopted immediately without waiting for official approval or logistical support. But official approval was not automatic. When the dual magazine system came to the attention of senior officers and ordnance inspectors, reactions were mixed. Some recognized the tactical value and recommended immediate adoption. Others raised concerns about magazine feed reliability, potential damage to magazine lips from the clamp pressure, and the lack of formal testing under controlled conditions. There were also bureaucratic objections. The modification had been developed and implemented without authorization, bypassing the normal channels for equipment evaluation and approval, allowing soldiers to fabricate and use unauthorized modifications. Some officers argued, set a dangerous precedent that could lead to safety issues and logistical complications. The debate was resolved, in part, by the soldiers themselves. Paratroopers and infantrymen who had used the dual magazine system in combat wrote letters, filed reports, and lobbied their officers, insisting that the modification worked and should be standardized. Brennan was called to division headquarters and asked to demonstrate the system for a group of ordnance officers and senior NCOs. He performed a series of timed reloads, compared the dual magazine system to standard magazine pouches, and explained the mechanics and benefits in terms that even skeptical officers could understand. The demonstration was convincing, and within weeks, the Army authorized the production of standardized dual magazine clamps for the M1 carbine. The official version, produced by contractors and distributed through normal supply channels, was refined and improved compared to Brennan's improvised prototype. It used spring steel instead of sheet metal, had rubber inserts to protect the magazine finish, and was designed to fit multiple magazine types. But the fundamental concept was unchanged. 2 magazines held back-to-back, allowing a soldier to reload in under 2 seconds by flipping and inserting. By late 1944, thousands of dual magazine clamps were in use across the European and Pacific theaters, and the modification became standard issue for airborne and Ranger units. The psychological effect on enemy forces, the impression of continuous fire and unlimited ammunition, proved to be as valuable as a tactical advantage. German soldiers who encountered American troops equipped with dual magazine carbines reported their observations in after-action reports and intelligence summaries. They described the endless rifle as a morale weapon, something that made American positions seem more heavily defended than they actually were, and that created hesitation and caution where aggression might have succeeded. The Germans had experienced similar effects with their own high rate of fire weapons like the MG-42, and they understood the psychological value of weapons that sounded and felt overwhelming. The fact that the Americans had achieved a similar effect with a simple modification to a standard rifle, rather than a purpose-built weapon system, was both impressive and frustrating to German commanders who were struggling with increasingly limited resources and industrial capacity. But Thomas Brennan did not receive a medal or public recognition for his innovation. He was not promoted, not featured in Army publications, and not invited to speak at training schools. The official narrative credited the dual magazine system to the Ordnance Department as a field modification developed through collaboration between combat units and technical specialists. Brennan's name appeared in a few internal documents, but those documents were classified and remained unavailable to the public for decades. He received a verbal commendation from his battalion commander, who told him privately that his innovation had saved lives and improved combat effectiveness, but that official recognition was complicated by the unauthorized nature of the development. Brennan accepted the explanation without bitterness. He had not developed the dual magazine system for recognition. He had developed it to survive, and the fact that it worked and helped other soldiers survive was sufficient reward. Brennan continued to serve with the 82nd Airborne to the end of the war, participating in Operation Market Garden, the Battle of the Bulge, and the final push into Germany. He was wounded twice, once by shrapnel during an artillery barrage, and once by a sniper round that grazed his shoulder, but both injuries were relatively minor, and he returned to duty within weeks. He carried his modified carbine through every engagement, and the dual magazine system never failed him. Other soldiers in his unit started calling him the Mechanic, a nickname that reflected both his background and his reputation for keeping equipment running when others would have given up. After the war, Brennan returned to Detroit, went back to work as an auto mechanic, and resumed the life he had left in 1942. He married, raised 3 children, and built a successful repair shop that became known for quality work and honest service. He rarely talked about the war, and when he did, he focused on the men he served with rather than his own experiences. He never mentioned the dual magazine system, never sought credit for its development, and never contacted military historians or journalists who might have been interested in the story. To Brennan, the war was a chapter that had closed, and dwelling on it felt self-indulgent. It was not until the 1970s, when a military researcher studying small arms innovations during World War II came across references to field-modified M1 carbines with dual magazine systems, that the story began to emerge. The researcher tracked down production records, interviewed veterans, and eventually found Brennan living quietly in a Detroit suburb. Brennan agreed to an interview, but only after the researcher assured him that the focus would be on the technical aspects of the modification rather than on personal heroism or drama. Over the course of several afternoons, Brennan explained the development process, demonstrated the reload technique, and provided sketches and notes he had kept from the war. The researcher was struck by Brennan's humility and his insistence that the dual magazine system was not a revolutionary innovation, but a common-sense solution to an obvious problem. Brennan's explanation of his thought process revealed something important about the nature of innovation in combat. He did not approach the reload problem as an engineer trying to design an optimal solution. He approached it as a mechanic trying to fix something that was broken. In his view, the M1 carbine was not broken, but the reload process was inefficient, and inefficiency in combat got people killed. The dual magazine system was not a sophisticated piece of engineering. It was a bracket that held 2 magazines together. But it worked because it addressed a specific problem that soldiers face in the field, the vulnerable pause during reloads, and it did so in a way that was simple, cheap, and easy to implement. That was the genius of the design, not its technical complexity, but its practical simplicity. The researcher published an article about Brennan and the dual magazine system in Military History Journal in 1978, and the story attracted modest attention from firearms enthusiasts and veterans. A few other soldiers who had used the system in combat reached out to share their own experiences, and a picture began to emerge of grassroots innovation that had spread through informal networks, soldier to soldier, long before it was officially recognized or standardized. The dual magazine clamp became a minor footnote in the history of World War II small arms development, mentioned in technical manuals and collected guides, but rarely discussed in popular histories or mainstream accounts of the war. Brennan himself remained ambivalent about the attention. He appreciated the recognition of the soldiers who had used the system and benefited from it, but he was uncomfortable with the idea that his personal contribution was being highlighted. In a follow-up interview in 1985, he was asked what he wanted people to understand about the dual magazine system and its role in the war. His answer was characteristically modest. "I want people to understand that soldiers are not passive recipients of equipment handed down from on high. We are user mechanics and problem solvers. When something does not work, we fix it. When something can be improved, we improve it. The dual magazine clamp was not my invention. It was a solution that made sense given the tools and materials available, and if I had not come up with it, someone else would have. The important thing is not who gets credit, but that the problem got solved and lives were saved." That perspective reflects a deeper truth about military innovation that is often overlooked in official histories and doctrinal discussions. The most effective innovations are often the ones that come from the bottom up, from the people who use the equipment and understand its limitations through direct experience. Top-down innovation, driven by research labs and procurement offices, has its place and has produced many critical advances. But bottom-up innovation, driven by soldiers in the field, has a different quality. It is immediate, practical, and focused on solving specific problems rather than pursuing theoretical improvements. The dual magazine system exemplified this kind of innovation. It was not developed because someone thought it would be interesting to experiment with magazine configurations. It was developed because soldiers were getting killed during reload cycles, and something had to be done. The legacy of Brennan's dual magazine system extends beyond World War II. The concept of linked or coupled magazines became a standard feature in military small arms design. influencing the development of weapon systems in the decades that followed. Modern rifles, from the AK-47 to the M4 Carbine, have been used with various forms of magazine coupling devices, ranging from simple tape and clamps to sophisticated polymer units designed specifically for rapid reloads. The principle remains the same: reduce the reload time, maintain continuous fire, and create a psychological advantage by eliminating predictable pause that enemy forces can exploit. Every time a soldier uses a coupled magazine system, whether in training or combat, they are benefiting from an innovation that traces back to a Detroit mechanic working with scrap metal in occupied France in 1944. But the story also highlights the institutional challenges that surround innovation in military organizations. Brennan's dual magazine system worked, saved lives, and was eventually adopted as standard equipment. But the path from field improvisation to official adoption was neither smooth nor straightforward. Brennan faced skepticism, resistance, and even disciplinary threats because he chose to modify his equipment without permission. The fact that his modification proved effective did not erase the institutional discomfort with unauthorized changes, and the recognition he received was limited and delayed. This pattern is not unique to Brennan or to World War II. It repeats throughout military history, with soldiers developing solutions to real problems, facing resistance from institutional structures that prioritize control and standardization, and eventually being vindicated when the solutions prove their worth in combat. The question this raises is whether military organizations can create systems that encourage bottom-up innovation without sacrificing the discipline and standardization that are also essential to effective operations. The answer is not simple, and different military organizations have approached the problem in different ways. Some have created formal channels for soldiers to submit ideas and modifications, with review processes designed to evaluate safety and effectiveness without stifling creativity. Others have adopted more flexible attitudes toward field modifications, allowing soldiers greater latitude to adapt equipment as long as basic safety standards are met. But the tension between innovation and control remains, and finding the right balance is an ongoing challenge. Thomas Brennan died in 1993 at the age of 71, and his obituary in the Detroit Free Press made brief mention of his service in the 82nd Airborne, but said nothing about the dual magazine system or his role in its development. His family knew he had been a paratrooper, knew he had seen combat, but he had never discussed the details with them. It was only after his death, when his children were going through his belongings, that they found a wooden box containing his wartime carbine, several dual magazine clamps, and a folder of notes and sketches documenting the development of the system. They donated materials to a military museum, where they remain on display as part of an exhibit on World War II small arms innovations. The exhibit includes a video loop showing how the dual magazine system worked, with side-by-side comparisons of standard reloads versus dual magazine reloads. The difference is striking. A soldier using standard magazine from pouches averages 4 to 5 seconds per reload. A soldier using dual magazines averages less than 2 seconds. That 3-second difference, multiplied across dozens of reloads of firefight, translates into hundreds of additional rounds delivered on target, sustained suppressive fire that keeps enemy forces pinned down, and a psychological edge that can break enemy morale. The video ends with a quote from Brennan, recorded during his 1985 interview. Innovation is not about being clever. It is about being desperate enough to try something different, and lucky enough that it works. That quote captures the essence of Brennan's story and the larger lesson it offers. The dual magazine system was not the product of a genius inventor or a well-funded research program. It was the product of a young soldier facing a life-threatening problem and refusing to accept that the problem was unsolvable. Brennan saw the vulnerability created by slow reloads, understood the mechanics of the M1 Carbine, and applied his skills as a mechanic to develop a practical solution. He did not wait for permission, did not submit proposals through official channels, and did not concern himself with regulations that made no sense in the context of survival. He built what was needed, tested it, shared it, and let the results speak for themselves. The Germans called it das endlose Gewehr, the endless rifle, because it defied their expectations and created the illusion of unlimited firepower. But the illusion was based on a simple mechanical truth, that 2 magazines attached, back-to-back, could be reloaded faster than 2 magazines carried separately. That truth, combined with the skill and determination of the soldiers who used the system, changed the dynamics of small unit combat, and saved lives. And that, in the end, is what innovation in warfare is supposed to do. Not create impressive technology for its own sake, but solve real problems, protect soldiers, and accomplish the mission. Thomas Brennan understood that, lived it, and left behind a legacy that continues to influence military equipment design and doctrine more than 70 years after he first fabricated a crew clamp from scrap metal in the hedgerows of Normandy. If this story moved your heart even once, subscribe. It's the least tribute we can give to men like him.